Она спикер так, Ильяшенко Юрий Сергеевич здесь?
Приветствую всех. Greetings to everybody.
Окей. Юрий Сергеевич, наверное, вот Бернольд Фильдер присутствует здесь. Наверное, надо по-английски, да?
I think yes. Bernald, greetings. Do you understand Russian or not?
I love to listen to you in any language. Maybe transparencies are in English a little bit.
No, transparencies are in Russian.
But formulas are in English.
Formulas
Your formulas
Юрий Сергеевич, тогда у вас выхода нет. Раз у вас представление на этом самом презентация на русском, значит, вам это придется по-английски говорить.
Please go ahead.
Okay, no problem. No
don't
problem.
worry about
in English.
No, don't worry
talk in
about
Russian,
it.
baby. A presentation in Russian, talk only in English.
Okay, fine. So, thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful conference. Let me share my screen. О богу. Все, ну я прошу прощения за потерянное время.
Да ладно.
So, there are two problems to discuss. The first one is structural stability
Мы вам 5 минут добавим.
Спасибо. Structural stability of generic glocal two-parameter families. Second, classification of the bifurcations in these families. Why these problems are interesting? Because in three-parameter families, there are open sets of glocal three-parameter families that are not structurally stable. And all the one-parameter families, generic glocal one-parameter families, are structurally stable. So structural stability of two-parameter families is a natural problem to be studied. Now, what shall be done in this talk? This should be sort of classification of problems that should be investigated. Many of them are partly investigated already. And to start the classification, I recall you the Andronov-Pantryagin criterion. The vector field on the sphere is structurally stable if and only if all the singular points are hyperbolic, all the closed orbits are hyperbolic limit cycles, and there are no saddle connections. When at least one of these conditions is broken, the bifurcation occurs. It seems superficially that there should be three classes of degeneracies of codimension 1: non-hyperbolic singular point, non-hyperbolic limit cycles, and saddle connections. This is not correct. Let me see. I cannot now switch. Let me switch my I switched my slides by hands. Okay, I will do that. So there are 6 basic degeneracies in the one-parameter bifurcations. The basic list is the following. 1, Andronov-Hopf bifurcation, 2 purely imaginary eigenvalues. 2, saddle node bifurcation, 1 eigenvalue 0, another non-zero. Do you see my mouth? Слава, видна моя мышка? Слава, вы меня слышите?
Юрий Сергеевич, что-то все на первом слайде, мы все находимся. Так и должно быть.
Нет, я уже включил второй слайд.
А вот
Его
мы
нет.
пока видим только первый. Может быть, надо его как-нибудь перегрузить еще раз. Почему-то не листается.
Понятно.
Да, еще раз повторяю, что я только что прорепетировал, и все работало. И никогда у меня так не было, чтобы не работало. Сейчас, минутку, я попробую еще. Не стало видно второго слайда?
Все еще первый.
Мгм.
Тут.
Мгм.
А у вас там поблизости какого-нибудь студента продвинутого нету?
Нет, к сожалению, я дома.
А,
Сейчас.
Юрий Сергеевич,
А?
а может, знаете, как сделаем? Давайте мы сейчас запустим следующий доклад.
Да, давайте, хорошо.
Вот. А потом после него вы это самое, с этого места продолжите.
Хорошо, давайте, ладно.
Потому что с Альбертом Морозовым мы согласовали, что в случае чего это, если вы опоздаете, там, например.
Хорошо,
ну,
давайте, ладно. Мгм. Запускайте следующий доклад, хорошо.
ага. Алик Морозов.
А тогда надо вот эту презентацию остановить.
Да, остановить презентацию. Нужно-
Алик, давайте вы начнете, да?
Нет, сейчас нужно остановить. Вот
Да.
сейчас.
Да, очень хорошо.
Так, меняются ли... Черт, у меня не... Вот в этом режиме у меня не меняются слайды. Когда я...
Саша Гонченко, а ты говорил, что там как-то можно, какой-то способ есть.
Сейчас. Так, ну, может, стрелочками вправо-влево, там, может, это будет меняться, если в одной папке все.
Или page up, page down.
Да.
Кнопки.
Ладно, значит...
Или можно презентацию, это, перезапускать показ.
А я думаю, что я буду перезапускать показ презентации. Значит, так, у меня сейчас остановлена демонстрация экрана, я правильно понимаю?
Да.
Ага. Так. 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 Появился другой слайд на экране, правильно я понимаю?
Да.
Да. Ну, ладно, это довольно мучительная процедура, но, по-видимому, придется ей пользоваться. При каждом переключении слайдов я буду, или, может быть, проще, если хозяин будет останавливать демонстрацию экрана, и я буду просить снова включить. Можно так сделать, да?
Ой, я не знаю, а кто хозяин-то у нас?
Там проще листать, наверное, как-то там. Листать.
Значит, Я могу листать, пока я не демонстрирую, пока я не демонстрирую экран. Вот я остановил демонстрацию. Вот теперь я листаю.
Нет, ну уже демонстрацию нужно, чтобы была демонстрация экрана вашего. Демонстрации сейчас нет, Юрий Сергеевич.
Значит, мне при каждом перелистывании слайда приходится останавливать демонстрацию экрана. Вот теперь на экране появился другой слайд.
Да,
Правильно я
третий
понимаю?
появился.
Да?
А вы тогда пока там перестраиваете, говорите какие-нибудь эти самые. Ну,
Я
заранее.
буду, да, я буду говорить какие-то
Хорошие
слова.
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 Да. Ну, значит, я прошу прощения, мой компьютер листает слайды, пока экран не демонстрируется,
Ага.
и не листает, когда он
Ну, и
демонстрируется.
ничего страшного. В общем, у вас полчаса, поэтому я думаю,
Хорошо, ладно.
даже может больше. Тут можно это
Хорошо.
в связи
Well.
с этими с техническими штучками.
Thanks. Я перехожу на английский. I will switch to English. Here is the basic list of the degeneracies that may occur in typical one-parameter families. This is a very well-known result. It goes back to Andronov and his school. It was systematized in a paper of Jorge Sotomayor, Soto, of 1974. And the list is the following. The first three pictures correspond to non-hyperbolic singular point. The first one, Andronov-Hopf, two imaginary eigenvalues. The second one, Sn, a saddle node, 1 zero eigenvalue and 1 non-zero. The third one, a saddle node with a homoclinic curve. It is called HC homoclinic curve. The separatrix of the two hyperbolic sectors returns to a parabolic sector. The fourth degeneracy is the saddle connection, just a common separatrix of two saddles. The fifth one is saddle loop, and the sixth one is the parabolic cycle. So the question is, so this is the basic list. Before I formulate a question, I will say two things. The first thing, is it a complete paper of what bifurcates in the generic one-parameter families? The answer is no, and on the next slide, I will show you what is the correct picture. The second thing is the following. We want to give a similar list of pictures that corresponds to the two-parameter bifurcations. In generic two-parameter families, two degeneracies from this list may be met simultaneously. So we write a table like a multiplication table, таблица умножения, in arithmetics, and in any cell we put two numbers, say 2 and 5, a saddle node and a separatrix loop met simultaneously. And we classify the degeneracies that should be studied. So this is the plan of what will be done. On the next slide, I want to show you the bifurcation of a parabolic cycle. So it seems obvious that a parabolic cycle bifurcates in a very simple way. Just on one side of the critical value of the parameter, the parabolic cycle vanishes, and on the other side, there are it splits to two limit cycles. But it may happen here on the here on this picture, we have the degenerate vector field. We have a semi-stable limit cycle, and it is surrounded by a transversal loop shown in blue. And there are many saddles whose inside the cycle, whose separatrices wind to the cycle in the negative time. Only one saddle is plotted. And even more saddles whose separatrices wind to this semi-stable cycle in the positive time. The cycle is surrounded by a blue loop without contact, by a blue curve loop without contact, and the separatrices that wind towards the cycle are stopped, truncated on this loop. And the truncation vertices, the intersection points of the separatrices with this loop, are shown. They are split to equivalence classes. The intersection points are split to equivalence classes. Two intersection points are equivalent if they belong to separatrices of one and the same saddle. And a point forms a single equivalence class if it belongs to only one separatrice of a saddle that intersects the blue curve. The forest of these separatrices is called baobab of separatrices, and it may be arbitrarily complicated. But in order to make an order in all these constructions, it is sufficient to consider the set of intersection points of the separatrices with the blue transversal loop. So it is sufficient to consider a finite set on a circle. And in this finite set, we have single points and pairs of equivalent points. And this is the way to describe an arbitrarily complicated baobab of separatrices. Now, the question arises. Suppose that we have plotted two pictures like this. There are two phase portraits of degenerate vector fields, degree of degeneracy 1. They have only one semi-stable cycle. The question is, will they bifurcate in the same way or not? The answer is, if one picture has two baobabs of separatrices and another has not, then definitely the bifurcations will be different. The fact is that when you move the parameter value so that the parabolic cycle disappears, this parabolic cycle, imagine that it disappears. Then the separatrices that entered the transversal loop will penetrate into the interior domain of the limit cycle and may collide with the separatrices from the saddles inside the limit cycle. So-called sparkling saddle connections will appear. And if sparkling saddle connections appear in one family and do not appear in another one, then the families are not topologically equivalent. The bifurcations are different. Now let us ask the following question. Suppose that the phase portraits of the degenerate vector field are topologically equivalent. So I plot two pictures like that, and one cannot see any difference between these two sketches. They are obviously homeomorphic. The question is, will they bifurcate in the same way? The answer is no. And in the right column on this slide, the classification of the bifurcations of vector fields with a parabolic limit cycle is described. Roughly speaking, the difference is the following. The separatrices from outside the limit cycle may be enumerated. The same for the inside separatrices. Then we say, first comes the 1-1 bifurcation, then 1-2, then 1-3, then 2-1 bifurcation, and so on. And in one picture, the order of bifurcations may be 1, and for the other family, the order of bifurcation of occurrence of saddle connections may be another. And therefore, the bifurcations in the parabolic cycle PC families is classified by two finite sets on a circle with an additional combinatorial information. I described this information briefly and will not describe it in full detail. So this is what I wanted to say about the sparkling saddle connections first, and the classification of the bifurcations second.
Юрий Сергеевич, а можно вопрос?
Yes, please.
А-
But
а вы-
I now already changed the picture. Should I turn it back?
Вот
Or not?
Баобаб, сепаратрис, it's your term or standard?
My term.
А вот means principally.
This complicated construction of saddles and their separatrices that wind towards a limit cycle.
Ну.
I give you another, on this slide, you can see another example of the baobab of separatrices. There is a saddle loop, black, and inside it there are red saddles. And separatrices of these saddles wind towards the saddle loop. And you can image a zillion of such saddles. And some of them will be between the separatrices of other saddles. So really it may be a complicated picture. So here is the saddle, and two other saddles are between the separatrices of the first saddle. And this is a simple baobab of separatrices together. Is it a sufficient answer? Сергей, я ответил на ваш вопрос?
Yes, of course.
Well,
Good.
okay. So next information comes. The pictures on the first slide were insufficient. They did not show all the subsets of the face portrait that do bifurcate. The subset of the face portrait that really bifurcates is called large bifurcation support, and large bifurcation supports are studied in full detail in a large paper by Natalia Goncharuk and myself. It is now on archive. And our description of a large bifurcation supports allows to answer the following question. Suppose that a vector field have a separatrix loop, or suppose that a vector field of codimension 2 has a polycycle separatrix polygon like an 8-shaped figure. Is it the complete part of the face portrait that will bifurcate? No. What other parts of the face portrait will bifurcate? And our description, the answer is, this part is called large bifurcation support. And our description in each particular case allows us to describe what part of the face portrait will really bifurcate. When we consider a saddle loop, we should add a baobab of separatrices inside it to get a large bifurcation support. There is a countable number of different large bifurcation supports, and therefore a countable number of non-equivalent bifurcations on the sphere generated by such a simple object as a saddle loop. The same for the 8-shaped figure. The complete description of the set that bifurcates in this case is a baobab of separatrices that wind towards the 8-shaped figure in the positive time, and in any loop of this figure inside a baobab of separatrices that wind to the loop in the positive time. So these are examples of the large bifurcation supports and examples of the face portraits that should be studied when we discuss the bifurcations into parameter families. In this slide, the following examples of large bifurcation supports are shown. First, semi-stable limit cycle with 2 baobabs of separate recess. Second, a saddle loop with 1 baobab of separate recess inside. Third, an 8-shaped figure with 2 baobabs of separate recess, 2 inside the loops and 1 outside. Now I change the slide
I have
and I show you a
a
table.
question.
Yes.
Question, okay?
Mhm.
What said with separate and inside loop, for example, must exist additional equilibrium, so.
Additional hyperbolic equilibria, and therefore there is no extra degeneracy. So this is still a codimension 1 degeneracy.
Yes.
The hyperbolic saddles, which are themselves locally structurally stable, behave in a bad way when they are collected together with the separatrix loop.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Do you see my next slide? Сережа, виден следующий слайд?
Видим.
Okay. So I said about a table like multiplication table. This is a table of degeneracies of codimension 1 that may be combined, 2 of them together, in generic 2-parameter families. So I show you this multiplication table, and what will follow is the phase portraits of the degenerate vector fields, probably various cases, that may occur that correspond to a particular element of this table. For instance, 3, 4, this means, I recall you that 3 is a homoclinic curve of a saddle node and 4 is a saddle connection. And I will show you different phase portraits of the degenerate vector fields. An important condition is that these degeneracies interact. It may happen that you may have a degenerate vector field, and in one part of the phase portrait, you have a homoclinic curve of a saddle node, and in another part, you have a saddle connection, and they do not interact at all. I do not consider such cases, though they are interesting too, and my 2 students, Bakiev and Androsov, study these cases and try to describe them systematically. So probably I will not give comments to the right column, and we'll switch to the next slide. I will try. It works like this. Do you see the next slide?
Yes.
Отлично.
Yes.
Okay, I will go like this. So
Все, научились, да?
здесь появились стрелки, которыми можно пользоваться, да, которых я раньше не видел. Они исчезают все время. So these are the pictures that correspond to the bifurcations in the first row, to 2, to 3. Oops, sorry. to 2, to 3, to 4, to 5, to 6. There are several different classes in any for any pair. Two classes for the bifurcation 2, 2, 1 for 2, 3, 4 for 2, 4, 2 to 2, 5, and a class SN, 1 in fact for 2, 6. The bifurcations in the families of the class 2, 6 are described in my recent paper in Chaos of this year. And it is interesting because it has a countable number of topologically non-equivalent bifurcation diagrams. And I will not give more comments about it. And the general bifurcations in the families of this type are described by my student Darovsky. In my paper, there was a restriction about the number of the saddles that take part in sparkling saddle connections, and Darovsky considered arbitrary baobabs of separatrices. So I will not give comments about all these pictures, just some selected. 2, 2 means that we have 2 saddle nodes, and there are 2 possible face portraits. The first one is when you have a separatrix of 2 hyperbolic saddle of 1 saddle node that come back to a hyperbolic sector of the second saddle node, and no effect like this. The separatrix goes to some attractor, and that's it. In red, I show schematically the baobabs of separatrices that enter the saddle node. They all may take part in the bifurcations, but I do not describe this in detail. The case 2, 4, this is a saddle node and a saddle node 2 and a saddle connection 4, but this is a connection not between 2 hyperbolic saddles, but a connection between a saddle node and a saddle. And this is studied, these bifurcations were studied by Dumortier, Roussary, Rousseau, and Grozovsky independently. And this polycycle is called half apple. This combination of 2 polycycles, 2 separatrix polygons, is called apple. And what is interesting, under the bifurcation of apple, which occurs in 2 parameter family, 3 limit cycles may occur. And what should be taken in account, that baobabs of separatrices occur, and complete classification of these bifurcations is not yet described. Neither is proved the structural stability of 2 parameter families that occur under the perturbation of these vector fields. So I want to stress again that a problem of structural stability of the local 2 parameter families is mainly open. It is proved by Darovsky for the SN families, and probably this is the only case.
Юрий Сергеевич, в принципе, пару минут осталось у вас.
Ага, хорошо, well. So probably I have said the main thing of what I wanted. I said about baobabs of separate rhesus, sparkling saddle connections, large bifurcation supports, classification of the generacies, and I can briefly show you the other pictures. Probably you should not deeply penetrate in what is shown here. These pictures correspond to the multiplication table that I described. And for all of them, you should prove, the problem is to prove structural stability and give a classification. So the pictures go like this, and the last very rich picture is two parabolic cycles with baobabs of separate rhesus inside, outside, and in between. All this is subject of the study. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ага. Thank you very much. Благодарим докладчика.
Thank you.
Где опубликованы ваши результаты?
This classification is not yet published, and together with Dmitry Filimonov, we are writing a paper about all this.
Вот this
This
problem,
should, yes, please. Mhm.
there exists something like models of stability and so and so.
No, no functional models, no numeric models occur in two-parameter families. I think this will be proved, but numeric models occur in the three-parameter families. Probably I should stop here and make a comment. There are two kinds or more, at least two kinds of classification of families, strong and weak. Strong classification have numeric moduli even in the one parameter case of parabolic cycle, and these moduli were discovered by Malte and Palles in 81. And weak classification seemed to have no moduli at all, but it has, and it is a much more difficult and deep result discovered by Shurov, Kudryashov, and myself in the paper of 18.
Thank you. No question.
Юрий Сергеевич,
Да-да?
это Лерман.
Ага, привет, Лев.
Привет. Ты знаешь работу Андронова и Леонтович 1938 года в докладах, где они описывают параметрические бифуркации, так сказать. То есть они систему первой степени грубости рассматривают, и
Да,
там они
да,
описывают возможные бифуркации.
Да, я эту работу смотрел внимательно. Да.
Вот я просто хотел бы, чтобы ты прокомментировал насчет сравнения с Шатамайером.
Они не доказывают, у них нет такого точного утверждения, что ничего другого не бывает в типичных однопараметрических семействах. И мне трудно сказать, пересечение большое, но проанализировать его сейчас я не могу.
Хорошо.
Но несомненно, их работа пионерская, а работа Сотомайера, который, может быть, не знал их работу фактически, но она как бы независимо пионерская, но более поздняя, вот так, и более полная. Ну, вот такой приблизительный комментарий.
Ну, окей, thank you very much.
Сотомайер, по-моему, еще на поверхностях, не обязательно плоскости рассматривать.
Это верно, это тоже верно. Да.
Мгм.
И этого у Андронова нет совсем.
Нет, это нет. Да.
Ну, thank you very much. Very interesting talk. Окей.
Мгм.
Ну,
Что ж, спасибо. Мгм.
благодарим еще раз докладчика. Вот.